I stood in the rain watching him through the restaurant window, laughing with his new girlfriend. The same man who'd texted me it's over after 15 years of marriage. The same man who'd emptied our savings account that morning. The same man who thought I was broken. But what Evan failed to understand was that you should never, ever underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. And he had no idea what was coming. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for joining me on this journey. If you're drawn to tales of women who find strength amidst betrayal, consider subscribing. It's free and helps support stories of resilience and new beginnings. Now let's explore how one abandoned woman turned an act of cruelty into the start of her liberation. The morning started like any other Monday. Rain tapped against the kitchen window as I stirred honey into my tea, scrolling through emails on my phone. Evan had been on a business trip for the past 3 days. Nothing unusual there. His consulting job often took him across the country. I'd grown used to the empty side of the bed, the quiet mornings alone. My phone buzzed. A text from Evan. I expected the usual check-in. Maybe an ETA for his return flight. What I got instead were 13 words that shattered 15 years of marriage. I want a divorce. Don't try to contact me. It's over. I'm not coming back. My mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the kitchen tile. Tea splashed across my bare feet, but I didn't feel it. I read the message again and again, each time hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. I called him immediately straight to voicemail. I tried again and again. Nothing. With trembling fingers, I opened our banking app, the joint account where we kept our savings, $127,493.21, saved over years of careful planning. It showed a balance of $212.45. The kitchen seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Fragments of ceramic crunching under my slippers. This couldn't be happening. Not after 15 years. Not after everything we'd built together. I slid down to the floor, my back against the refrigerator, breathing in short, painful gasps. Our wedding photo stared down at me from the wall. Evan in his grey suit, me in white lace, both of us smiling like we had all the answers. My phone rang. My sister Julia. "Hey, stranger," she said, her voice sunny. "Wanted to see if you and Evan wanted to come over this weekend. The kids have been asking about their favourite aunt and uncle." I opened my mouth to speak, but all that came out was a strangled sob. "Clara, what's wrong?" "He's gone," I managed to say. Evan left me by text message, and my voice cracked. He took everything. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 3 long seconds. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Julia said finally. "Don't move." I'm not sure how long I sat there on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken ceramic and cooling tea. Memories flooded through me. Our first apartment, the honeymoon in Greece, the Christmas he surprised me with the vintage record player I'd been eyeing for months. Had it all been a lie? Every anniversary card, every I love you, every plan we'd made for our future. When the doorbell rang, I was still sitting there, my phone clutched in my hand, reading his message over and over. Julia took one look at me and wrapped me in a hug so tight it hurt. She smelled like cinnamon and baby shampoo, familiar smells that suddenly made everything else feel even more foreign. "Come on," she said, helping me up. "First we call a lawyer, then we figure out what the hell happened." "He emptied our accounts," I said. My voice hollow. "Almost everything we had." Julia's eyes flashed with anger. "Then he's not just a coward, he's a thief." She guided me to the couch and handed me a glass of water. "Drink this." "I'm calling Nate." Her husband was a detective with the local police. As Julia made calls, something shifted inside me. The numbness was giving way to something else, something hot and sharp that spread through my chest. I pulled out my laptop and logged into our cell phone account. I could see the call history, the text messages. It was a family plan under my name. Scrolling through Evan's records, I saw a pattern. Calls to the same number almost daily for the past 8 months. "Julia," I called out, my voice steadier than before. "I need you to run a number for me." She looked up from her phone, brow furrowed. "What number?" I turned the laptop toward her. "This one. He's been calling it every day." While Julia spoke quietly to her husband, I opened another tab and logged into our email. Evan and I had shared passwords since we got married, an open book policy we'd agreed on from the start. Or at least I thought we had. His inbox loaded. Hundreds of unread emails. I searched for hotel and found reservation confirmations going back months. Not for cities he was supposed to be visiting for work, but for weekend getaways to coastal towns and mountain retreats. Then I found the email trail with his company's HR department. He hadn't been on a business trip this week. He'd taken vacation days. Julia sat down beside me, her face grave. "Nate ran the number," she said quietly. "It belongs to someone named Chloe Warren. She's 27. Works at Pacific Northwest Investment Group." My stomach lurched. Evan was 42. I was 40. Chloe was barely out of college. "Clara," Julia continued even more gently. "Nate says she bought a condo last month in Bellevue, the exclusive neighborhood we always talked about moving to someday when we could afford it. Nate's on his way over with his lawyer friend," Julia said. "We're going to figure this out." I nodded, but my attention had drifted back to the laptop screen. I'd found something else. Emails between Evan and a private bank I'd never heard of. Statements for an account in his name only. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Julia was saying something about temporary restraining orders and emergency custody of assets, but her words seemed to come from far away. A strange calm was settling over me like the eye of a hurricane. I closed the laptop slowly. "Julia," I said, interrupting whatever legal strategy she was outlining. "I need you to do something for me." "Anything," she said immediately. "I need to know where he is right now." Nate arrived with his friend Grant, a divorce attorney with the kind of expensive suit and perfectly coiffed silver hair that screamed success. They sat across from me at the dining room table, notebooks open, expressions serious. "First things first," Grant said, folding his hands on the table. "We file an emergency petition to freeze any remaining assets. What Evan did emptying shared accounts without notice during an intact marriage that's not just morally wrong, it's legally questionable." Nate nodded. "And we've got a buddy at the bank who can help us trace where that money went. If he moved it somewhere we can find, we can potentially claw it back." I stared at the grain of the wooden table, tracing a finger along its swirls and knots. The table we bought at an antique store in Portland on our 5th anniversary. Evan had said it would be an heirloom we'd pass down to our children someday. "Clara?" Grant's voice pulled me back. "Are you following?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Freeze assets. Trace the money." "What else?" "We need to understand the full picture," he continued. "Bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds, insurance policies, everything. We need to know what he's hiding." My phone buzzed. A text from Julia. "Found him. Bareilles downtown." Not alone. My heart stuttered in my chest. Bareilles was an upscale Italian restaurant where Evan and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary. He'd said it was our special place. "I need some air," I said abruptly, standing up. "Can we continue this tomorrow?" Grant and Nate exchanged glances. "Of course," Grant said, closing his notebook. "But I strongly advise against contacting Evan directly. Anything you say could be used against you later." I nodded mechanically. "I understand. I just need to clear my head." After they left, I stood in the shower under scalding water, letting it pound against my skin until it turned pink. The numbness was fading, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed carefully. Black jeans, a deep blue blouse Evan had once said brought out my eyes. Leather boots. I applied makeup with precision, something I rarely bothered with on ordinary days. There was nothing ordinary about today. The rain had stopped by the time I parked a block away from Barolo's. The evening air smelled of wet pavement and distant sea salt. I walked slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then I saw them through the restaurant's front window. Evan sat at a corner table, our usual table, across from a young woman with honey blonde hair and perfect posture. She laughed at something he said, reaching across to touch his hand. On her wrist gleamed a gold bracelet I recognized immediately. It had belonged to my grandmother. It was gifted to me on our wedding day. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, rain beginning to fall again, soaking through my jacket. Evan threw his head back in laughter, his face more animated than I'd seen it in years. The woman, Chloe Warren, reached into her purse and pulled out a set of keys, sliding them across the table to him with a smile. New house keys. I realized for their new life together, a life paid for with our money, our 15 years of dreams and sacrifices. Something broke loose inside me then, not an explosion of rage, but something colder and more focused. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of them through the window. Then another of their intertwined hands, and another of the keys on the table between them. A couple hurried past me, huddled under an umbrella, giving me strange looks. I must have been quite a sight. A woman standing alone in the rain, staring through a restaurant window, taking photos like some private investigator in a cheap thriller. I walked back to my car, movements mechanical, mind racing. By the time I slid behind the wheel, my clothes were soaked through, but I barely noticed. I had stopped shaking. The pain was still there, a raw wound pulsing beneath my ribs. But now it had company, a cold, hard certainty about what needed to happen next. Evan hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd stolen our life savings. He'd planned his exit for months while looking me in the eye every day, telling me he loved me. He'd given my grandmother's bracelet to his girlfriend. This wasn't just about a divorce or an affair. This was about justice. Yahoo money. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, already mentally listing what I would need: information, allies, a plan. Evan had always underestimated me. He saw me as the reliable wife, the steady partner who handled the details of our shared life while he chased career advancement and apparently younger women. He thought I would crumble when he left. He had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of. As I drove home through the rain-soaked streets, one thought kept circling in my mind. Evan had taken everything from me. Now I would return the favor. Our house felt different when I returned, less like a home and more like a museum of a life that no longer existed. I walked through each room, seeing everything with new eyes. The framed photos on the walls, the books on the shelves with both our names scribbled inside the covers, the mismatched coffee mugs we'd collected from various trips. 15 years of shared history surrounded me, and yet I felt like a stranger in my own home. I made coffee and sat up at the dining room table, pulling out a notebook, old-fashioned, but safer than digital notes that could be traced or hacked. Then I began to write, making lists, sketching timelines, mapping connections. By midnight, I had the outline of a plan. By 3 a.m., I had filled 27 pages with details, contingencies, and questions that needed answers. When the first grey light of dawn filtered through the windows, I made another pot of coffee and called Julia. "I need your help," I said when she answered, voice groggy with sleep. "And I need you not to ask too many questions." There was a pause. "Are you okay? You sound different." "I'm better than okay," I said. "I know what I need to do." Over the next 2 weeks, I moved with a purpose that surprised even me. During the day, I met with Grant, gathering documents, filing emergency petitions, playing the role of devastated wife fighting to salvage what was left of her financial security. I let him believe I was following his advice to focus on the legal battle and emotional healing. But at night, I worked on my real plan. Evan had been Chief Financial Officer at Sterling Development for 7 years. The company had grown exponentially under his financial guidance, expanding from local projects to major developments across 3 states. His reputation in the business community was sterling. His CEO, Quentin Sterling, treated him like a son. What very few people knew, what I knew only because Evan talked in his sleep, was that Sterling Development had cut corners on building safety to maximize profits on their last 3 major projects. Evan had helped cook the books to hide the substandard materials from investors and regulators alike. I needed proof. On day 3, I called Evan's assistant, Lisa, who had always liked me. I told her I was trying to find some tax documents Evan had been working on at home before his sudden business emergency. She was clearly uncomfortable. She must have known about his departure, but her loyalty to me won out. He kept backups of everything important on a hard drive, she said hesitantly. Did you check his desk at home? I thanked her and hung up. Evan's home office yielded nothing at first glance, but I knew my husband. He was methodical to a fault. If the hard drive existed, it would be somewhere logical. I found it taped to the underside of his desk drawer, a small black external drive no bigger than my palm. Password protected, of course. But Evan had another weakness besides younger women. He reused passwords. I tried the one he used for his fantasy football league. Our wedding date followed by his mother's maiden name. The drive unlocked on the first try. What I found was better than I could have hoped for. Spreadsheets showing the original construction budgets versus the actual expenditures. Emails between Evan and suppliers discussing lower-grade materials being substituted for what was specified in building plans. Photos of substandard electrical work with timestamps and locations. And most damning of all, a folder labelled Westridge Personal that contained evidence Quentin Sterling had been embezzling from his own company for years with Evan's help facilitating the transfers. I copied everything, then carefully returned the drive to its hiding place. Evan wouldn't be back for it. He thought he was too smart to leave evidence lying around, but on the off chance he remembered, I wanted him to find it exactly where he'd left it. Next, I needed to understand exactly where our money had gone. Nate came through with bank records showing Evan had transferred our savings to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands 3 days before leaving me. The account was in his name only. It's going to be hard to get that money back, Nate warned. Could take years of legal battles. And even then, I nodded, playing the part of the distraught wife while mentally adding the account details to my notes. The third piece of the puzzle was Chloe Warren, young, ambitious, and clearly infatuated with Evan. Through social media and some careful questions to mutual acquaintances, I learned she worked directly under Quentin Sterling as his executive assistant. She'd been with the company for just over a year, right around the time Evan had started making those daily phone calls. I wondered if she knew about the financial irregularities at Sterling Development. If she was complicit or merely a convenient pawn in Evan's exit strategy. Either way, she was wearing my grandmother's bracelet and sleeping in a condo bought with my life savings. 2 weeks after Evan's text, I was ready to move. I started with a burner phone, purchased with cash at a convenience store 30 miles out of town. Using it, I created an email account under a generic name and composed a careful message to 3 people. The state building inspector, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and a reporter at the Seattle Times, known for breaking stories about corporate corruption. The message was simple. Sterling Development has falsified safety records and embezzled investor funds. Evidence attached. I included just enough of the files from Evan's hard drive to pique their interest, promising more to anyone who responded. I used public Wi-Fi at a library 2 counties over to send the emails, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, just in case there were security cameras. Then I waited. The reporter, Alicia Washington, responded first. Her email came less than 3 hours after I sent mine. "This is explosive if verified. Need to meet. Can you call me?" I didn't respond immediately. Timing was everything. The next day, I drove to the bank where Evan and I had kept our safe deposit box. Using the key he didn't know I had, he'd reported his lost years ago and had a replacement made. I emptied the box of everything except the items that were solely his grandfather's watch, his college ring, and the first dollar he'd earned at Westridge, framed in silver as a gift from Quentin. Our marriage certificates, property deeds, insurance policies, and my own family heirlooms came with me. I left no trace I'd been there. That evening, I called Alicia Washington from my burner phone. "I need guarantees," I said when she answered. "Anonymity, protection. I can't promise anything until I know what I'm dealing with," she replied cautiously, "but the Times has a strong record of protecting sources." "Tomorrow," I said, "I'll send you an address. Come alone." I hung up before she could ask more questions. The next piece fell into place when Nate called with news about Evan. "He's trying to liquidate some of your joint investments. He said Grant got an emergency injunction, but he's fighting it. Says he needs the cash for a new business venture." "Let him think he's winning," I said. "For now." Nate was silent for a moment. "Clara, what are you planning?" "You don't sound like yourself lately." I forced a laugh. "I'm just tired of being the victim in this story." That night, I sent Evan a text. My first communication since his message ending our marriage. "We need to talk in person about the divorce terms. I won't fight you, but I want what's fair." His response came an hour later. "My lawyer will be in touch." I was ready for that. "No lawyers, just us. I have a proposal that benefits both of us. Meet me tomorrow, 7 p.m. at the house. If you don't show, I start fighting for everything, and I have more ammunition than you think." The implied threat worked. He agreed to meet. Meanwhile, I'd been systematically moving my pieces into position. I'd withdrawn the maximum daily amount from our remaining joint accounts for 2 weeks straight, building a cash reserve. I'd spoken to Grant about options for the house, letting him believe I was considering it and moving closer to Julia. I'd also made contact with 3 of Sterling Development's largest investors, using carefully crafted emails that hinted at financial irregularities without making direct accusations. Seeds of doubt planted with precision. The day before my scheduled meeting with Evan, I finally responded to Alicia Washington, giving her the address of a coffee shop across town. When she arrived, notepad in hand and recorder ready, I slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything you need is there," I said. "Financial records, falsified safety documents, proof of embezzlement. The main players are Quentin Sterling and his CFO and Trey Evan Harmon." Her eyes widened at Evan's name. "Your husband?" So she'd done her homework. Good ex-husband. I corrected. "As of 2 weeks ago, I need to verify all this," she said, turning the drive over in her hand. "And I'll have questions. You have my number," I said, standing to leave. "But you'd better work fast. I've sent the same information to the FBI and state regulators. This story breaks with or without you." As I walked out, I felt her eyes on my back, full of questions I had no intention of answering yet. Back at home, I made one final preparation. I transferred every incriminating file from Evan's hard drive to my own secure storage, then carefully wiped the original drive clean and replaced it exactly where I'd found it. If he checked, he'd find nothing but empty space. Then I set the dining room table for 2, opened a bottle of the Cabernet he'd been saving for a special occasion, and waited for my husband to arrive. The stage was set. The trap was ready, and Evan had no idea what was coming. At exactly 7:02 p.m., headlights swept across the living room wall as Evan's BIM pulled into the driveway. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress a deep burgundy that matched the wine I'd poured and waited. The key turned in the lock. He still had his key, of course. He'd taken everything else. Why not that too? Evan stepped into the foyer, hesitating when he saw me waiting at the dining table. He looked good, tanned, rested. No visible signs of guilt or remorse on his face. "Clara," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You look well. Wine?" I offered, gesturing to the bottle. "It's the 2010 Cass you were saving." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. That wine had cost $300. He'd been saving it for years. "I think we should keep this brief," he said, remaining standing. "What's this proposal you mentioned?" I took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch. Evan had always hated silence. It made him nervous. 15 years, I said finally. 15 years, and you couldn't even tell me to my face that you were leaving. He looked uncomfortable. I didn't see the point in a dramatic scene. It was cleaner this way. "Cleaner," I repeated. Like stealing our life savings was cleaner than an honest divorce. Like giving my grandmother's bracelet to your new girlfriend was cleaner than returning it to me. His expression hardened. "I see you've been spying on me. I prefer to call it due diligence." I took another sip of wine. "Sit down." "Evan, this won't take long." Reluctantly, he took the seat across from me. The candles between us cast shadows across his face, making his features seem sharper, more predatory. "I know about the offshore account," I said calmly. "I know about the condo in Bellevue. I know about Chloe Warren, and I know she's been Quentin Sterling's assistant for the past year." He stiffened, but said nothing. "Here's my proposal," I continued. "You transfer half of our savings back to me, $163,746.60 to be exact. You sign the house over to me entirely. You return my grandmother's bracelet. In exchange, I walk away quietly. No contested divorce, no public battle." Evan's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Or what? You'll take me to court." "Good luck proving I took anything that wasn't legally mine to manage as your husband." I smiled for the first time since he entered the room. "Oh, I'm not talking about divorce court, Evan. I'm talking about criminal court." His confidence wavered just slightly. "What are you talking about?" "Building code violations at Westridge Tower. Embezzlement from the Lakeside project. Tax fraud on the Henderson development." I listed them casually as if reading off a grocery list. "Quentin skimming millions from investor funds with your help. Should I go on?" The blood drained from his face. "You're bluffing." Without breaking eye contact, I reached into the folder beside me and slid a document across the table. It was an email from Quentin to Evan explicitly discussing how to hide substandard electrical work from inspectors. I'd highlighted the most incriminating passage. Evan stared at it, then at me. "Where did you get this?" "You really should change your passwords once in a while," I said. "And you should know that I've secured copies of everything. If anything happens to me, if you fight me on any aspect of this divorce, those copies go directly to the FBI, the Seattle Times, and every major investor in Sterling Development." His hands curled into fists on the table. "You wouldn't. You'd be implicating yourself. As an innocent spouse with documented evidence that I had no knowledge of the criminal activities, I'll take my chances." I leaned forward. "You, on the other hand, would be looking at federal prison time. And so would Quentin and possibly Chloe, depending on how much she knows." The mention of Chloe seemed to hit him harder than the threat to himself. "Interesting, you've lost your mind," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, Evan, I found my spine." I closed the folder and stood up. "You have 48 hours to transfer the money and sign the papers Grant has prepared. The bracelet can be left in the mailbox. No need for another face-to-face." He rose slowly, his expression a mix of shock and calculation. I could almost see the gears turning as he tried to find a way out, an angle I hadn't covered. "And if I refuse?" he asked finally. "Then I destroy everything you've built." I met his gaze steadily. "Not just your freedom, but your reputation. Your relationship with Chloe. Do you think she'll stand by you when you're being indicted for fraud? Your standing in the business community gone overnight. Your parents' pride in their successful son shattered." I stepped closer, close enough to smell his cologne, the same brand I'd given him for Christmas last year. "You took everything from me without a second thought," I said softly. "Don't test whether I'm willing to do the same." For a long moment we stood there in silence, the air between us charged with 15 years of history and 2 weeks of careful planning. Then Evan turned and walked out without another word, the door closing behind him with a quiet click. I sank back into my chair, hands trembling for the first time all evening. The first phase was complete. Now I just had to wait. But Evan had never been good at accepting defeat. I knew he would look for leverage for a counter move. He would check his backup drive first, find it wiped clean, and assume I hadn't made copies. He would talk to Quentin, warn him. They would try to close ranks, destroy evidence, create a united front, which is exactly what I was counting on. The next morning, Alicia Washington's byline appeared on the front page of the Seattle Times digital edition. Exclusive, major Seattle developer accused of fraud, safety violations. The article didn't name me as a source, but it quoted extensively from the documents I provided, painting a damning picture of Sterling Development's practices. By noon, the State Building Inspector's Office had announced an emergency audit of all Westridge properties. By 3 p.m., the company's stock had plummeted 22%. By 5 p.m., 3 major investors had publicly demanded answers. My phone rang constantly. Grant, Nate, Julia, even old friends who'd seen the news and made the connection to Evan. I let everything go to voicemail. Evan didn't call. Instead, at exactly 7 p.m., the 24-hour mark of my ultimatum, he texted, "Meet me at the pier. 9 p.m. We need to talk." The fishing pier had been our spot early in our relationship. We'd had our first kiss there, overlooking the water on a summer night, much like this one. It was isolated this time of year, especially after dark. He was getting desperate. Good. I texted back a simple okay and made my final preparations. The night air was cool and damp as I walked down the wooden planks of the pier at 8:55 p.m. The water below was black and still, reflecting the few stars visible through Seattle's perpetual cloud cover. At the far end, a solitary figure stood looking out at the water. Evan turned as I approached, his face half hidden in shadow. He looked older somehow, the strain of the past 24 hours etched into the lines around his mouth. "You've been busy," he said as I stopped a few feet away from him. "I warned you what would happen." "The article doesn't name you as the source." "Not yet," I agreed. He took a step closer. "What do you want, Clara?" "Really? Is this about the money?" "The house?" "It was never about the money," I said quietly. "It was about the 15 years, the promises, the trust. If you'd been honest, if you'd looked me in the eye and told me you'd fallen in love with someone else, I would have been hurt, but I would have let you go. And now I want you to understand what it feels like to have everything taken away in an instant, to realize the life you thought you had was built on lies." He scoffed. "So this is revenge? Bringing down an entire company, risking people's jobs just to hurt me. Don't pretend to care about the employees now," I said. "Not after what you and Quentin did. Those buildings aren't safe, Evan. People could die." He ran a hand through his hair. "I can fix this," he said, voice urgent. "I can work with the inspectors, make the necessary upgrades. Nobody needs to get hurt. It's too late for that. It's not. He stepped closer again. Close enough that I could see his eyes now, dark and intent. I've already transferred the money back to our joint account. All of it, not just half. The house is yours. I've signed the papers. And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My grandmother's bracelet, he said, holding it out to me. I'm sorry, I never should have taken this. I never should have done any of it this way. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost felt a flicker of the love that had sustained me for 15 years. Then I noticed he was recording our conversation on his phone, partially hidden in his jacket pocket. The screen glow was visible in the darkness. Turn it off, I said coldly. He blinked. What? The recording? Turn it off or I walk away right now and send everything else I have to the FBI. Slowly, reluctantly, he pulled out his phone and stopped the recording. Delete it, I insisted. He complied, showing me the screen as he did. You still don't get it, I said, taking the bracelet box but not opening it. This isn't a negotiation. You don't get to bargain your way out of consequences. What more do you want? He asked, frustration edging into his voice. I've given back everything. I've apologized. I want you to know how it feels, I repeated, to have no control, to watch your life unravel and be powerless to stop it. As if on cue, headlights appeared at the shore end of the pier, illuminating us in harsh white light. 2 vehicles, police cruisers, their light bars dark. Evan's head snapped around. What is this? Remember Nate, my sister's husband? I stepped back as the car doors opened and figures emerged. Turns out he's been building a case against Sterling Development for months. Something about suspicious money transfers through foreign accounts. He just needed a break in the case. Nate walked toward us, flanked by another detective and a man in a dark suit who radiated federal authority. Evan Harmon, the suited man, called out, FBI, we'd like to ask you some questions about your role at Sterling Development. Evan's face contorted with rage and disbelief. You set me up, he hissed at me. You planned all of this. No, I said calmly. You set yourself up the moment you decided to steal from me, lie to me, and throw away 15 years like they meant nothing. I just made sure you couldn't run from it. As Nate approached, I handed him the velvet box. Evidence, I said loud enough for Evan to hear. My grandmother's bracelet taken from our safe deposit box without permission. Evan lunged toward me, but Nate was faster, stepping between us. I wouldn't, he warned. They're very interested in Quentin Sterling's role in all this. They might be willing to offer you a deal if you cooperate. Something to think about while you're explaining to Chloe why the FBI is seizing her condo. I walked away then, Nate falling into step beside me as we headed back to shore, leaving Evan with the federal agent and the weight of his own choices. You okay? Nate asked quietly as we reached his car. I will be, I said, surprised to find it was true. The indictments came down 3 weeks later. Evan, Quentin Sterling, and 2 other executives at the company were charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and criminal negligence related to the building safety violations. The newspaper coverage was extensive, with Alicia Washington breaking each new development in the case. Chloe wasn't charged. She'd apparently been unaware of the financial crimes, but she was interviewed extensively by both the FBI and the press. The photos of her leaving the federal building, eyes red from crying, face partially hidden behind large sunglasses, made the local news. She'd moved out of the Bellevue condo, which had been seized as part of the investigation. I wondered if she still wore my grandmother's bracelet. Somehow I doubted it. I didn't follow the case closely after that. Julia kept me updated on the major developments, plea negotiations, court appearances, the civil lawsuits that inevitably followed from investors and homeowners whose properties were now under scrutiny for safety issues. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. The house sold quickly despite the publicity surrounding Evan. I used the proceeds and my restored savings to buy a small cottage near the coast, far enough from Seattle that I didn't have to worry about running into familiar faces at the grocery store or coffee shop. Grant handled the divorce proceedings with ruthless efficiency. Evan, facing far more serious legal troubles, didn't contest any of my claims. The divorce was finalized 6 months after he walked out with a settlement heavily in my favor. Not that it mattered much to Evan. At that point, most of his assets had been frozen or seized in the criminal investigation. On the 1-year anniversary of the text message that had ended my marriage, I sat on the small deck of my new home, watching the sunset over the water. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. Just heard on the news. Evan took a plea deal. 5 years cooperation against Quentin. You doing okay? I stared at the message for a long moment. 5 years. Less than I'd expected, but still significant. Long enough for Chloe to move on, build a new life without him. Long enough for the business community to forget his name, or at least relegate it to cautionary tales told in boardrooms. I typed back, I'm good. Really good. Coming for dinner Sunday. Then I set the phone down and turned back to the sunset. The sky had turned the same deep burgundy as the dress I'd worn that night at the dining room table when I'd laid my trap and watched Evan walk right into it. I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. Not sadness either, just a quiet certainty that justice in its own way had been served. 2 days later, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. Against my better judgment, I answered, Clara. Evan's voice, instantly recognizable despite the slight distortion of the prison phone system. Please don't hang up. I said nothing, waiting. I don't have long, he continued when my silence stretched on. I just needed to say something to you before they transfer me. I still didn't speak, but I didn't hang up either. You were right, he said finally, his voice dropping almost to a whisper about all of it. I thought you were weak. I thought you needed me more than I needed you. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air between us, spanning miles of physical distance and oceans of betrayal. Is that all? I asked finally. No, he hesitated. I wanted to ask you something. That night at the pier, you said if I'd been honest with you, if I'd told you I'd fallen for someone else, you would have let me go. Did you mean that? I considered the question. Really considered it. Yes, I said at last. I loved you, Evan. I would have wanted you to be happy even if it wasn't with me. That's what I thought. His voice sounded hollow now. That's how I know you're a better person than I am. You would have let me go. I tried to destroy you instead. Why are you calling me Evan? What do you want? Nothing, he said quickly. Nothing from you. You've done more than enough to ensure I have plenty of time to think about my choices. There was no bitterness in his tone, which surprised me. I guess I wanted you to know that I understand now what you did. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice for you, for the people who could have been hurt by those buildings, for everyone Sterling Development lied to. He paused and I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not that it changes anything. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Are you happy? He asked abruptly. In your new life? The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? I thought about my cottage by the sea, the writing workshop I joined in town, the slow, careful friendships I was building with people who knew nothing about my past, the peace I felt most days, watching the waves roll in and out, marking time in their ancient rhythm. I'm getting there, I said honestly. Good, he said. That's good. A voice in the background announced his time was up. I have to go, he said. I won't call again. I just needed you to know. Know what? That you won, he said simply, completely. And that I know I deserved it. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood on my deck that evening, phone still clutched in my hand, watching the tide come in. Evan's words echoed in my mind. You won. Had I? The victory felt different than I'd imagined during those long nights planning my revenge. Less sweet, more complicated. What exactly had I won? A divorce I never wanted. A house I'd sold. A life I was still rebuilding from scratch. But as I watched the waves wash over the shore, erasing footprints and reshaping the sand with each retreating surge, I realized Evan had it wrong. This wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't even about him anymore. It was about standing up when someone tried to knock me down. About refusing to be a footnote in my own life story. About discovering strengths I never knew I had until they were tested by fire. I picked up my phone and deleted Evan's number. Then I went inside, made a cup of tea, and opened my laptop to work on the novel I'd started writing 3 months ago, something I'd always wanted to do, but never found time for during my marriage. The main character was a woman rebuilding her life after betrayal, but unlike the real story that had inspired it, my fictional heroine wasn't fueled by revenge. She was driven by something much more powerful, the discovery that she had always been stronger than she knew. As my fingers moved across the keyboard, shaping her story, my story reimagined, I felt the last pieces of my old life fall away, making room for whatever came next. Evan had been right about one thing. I had won. Not because he lost everything, but because I found myself in the wreckage of what he destroyed. And that self, resilient, determined, capable of more than I'd ever imagined, was worth everything I'd been through to discover her. In the end, the revenge hadn't been about making Evan suffer. It had been about refusing to let him define my worth or determine my future. It had been about reclaiming my power in the most fundamental way possible. The knowledge settled over me like a warm blanket as night fell outside my window. Beyond the glass, the ocean continued its eternal dance with the shore, taking, giving, reshaping, renewing, just like me. The bookstore was crowded for a Tuesday afternoon. I adjusted the microphone nervously, scanning the faces that had gathered for the reading. Most were strangers, locals from the small coastal town I now called home, curious about the debut author in their midst. But in the back row sat Julia and Nate, my sister giving me an encouraging thumbs up. Thank you all for coming. I began opening the hardcover edition of my novel, The Reckoning. I'd like to read a passage from chapter 3. I cleared my throat and found my place on the page. She had spent 15 years believing in their shared story, a tale of partnership, of growth, of futures intertwined like vines climbing the same trellis. But as she stood in the kitchen that morning, staring at 13 words on a glowing screen, she realized she'd been reading from the wrong book all along. This wasn't a love story. It was a thriller. And she was finally turning the page to a chapter where she, not he, would determine how the plot unfolded. As I continued reading, my voice growing stronger with each sentence, I caught movement at the back of the store. A woman slipped in, taking an empty seat near the door. Honey blonde hair, expensive shoes, perfect posture. Chloe Warren. Our eyes met briefly before I returned to the text, not missing a beat. She'd recognized me too. How could she not? My photo was on the back cover of the book she was now holding. When the reading ended and the polite applause faded, people lined up to have their books signed. I answered questions about my writing process, my inspiration, my next project. I smiled and thanked each person for coming, and all the while, I was aware of Chloe waiting, hanging back until the line dwindled to nothing. Finally, she approached the table, book in hand. Up close, she looked older than I remembered from that night through the restaurant window. Fine lines around her eyes, a certain weariness in her expression that hadn't been there before. You probably don't want to sign this for me, she said quietly, setting the book on the table between us. Why wouldn't I asked, uncapping my pen. What name should I make it out to? You know who I am, she said, a slight edge to her voice. Yes, I agreed. You're Chloe Warren, former executive assistant to Quentin Sterling, current marketing director at, I paused, pretending to search my memory. Rainier Technologies, isn't it? She nodded, surprise flickering across her face. You've been keeping tabs on me. Not really, I said truthfully. Small world, smaller business community, news travels. I opened her book to the title page and wrote a brief inscription before signing my name. I didn't read it aloud, but she would see it later. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best versions of ourselves. Wishing you well on your journey. He's being released next month, she said abruptly as I handed the book back. Early parole for good behavior and cooperation. I'd known this was coming, of course. Nate had warned me months ago about the parole hearing. Still, hearing it stated so boldly made my stomach tighten. I see, I said evenly. Are you telling me this as a warning or as his messenger? Neither. Chloe clutched the book to her chest like a shield. He doesn't know I'm here. We haven't spoken in over 2 years. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. Then why are you here, Chloe? She glanced around the nearly empty bookstore. Then back at me. Because I read an advanced copy of your book. My roommate works in publishing. She hesitated. It's not exactly what happened, is it? In real life? It's fiction, I said carefully. Inspired by true events, but fiction nonetheless. The woman in your book forgives him in the end, she said. Her voice barely above a whisper. She moves on completely. Finds peace, even happiness. I nodded slowly. Yes, she does. Have you? The question was direct, her gaze steady. Found peace. I mean, it was my turn to be surprised. Of all the things I might have expected from this encounter, genuine curiosity about my emotional state wasn't on the list. Most days, I said honestly. Some days are harder than others. Chloe nodded as if I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. He ruined my life, too. You know, my reputation, my career trajectory, my trust in my own judgment. Everyone assumed I knew what was happening, that I was complicit. Were you? I asked the question out before I could reconsider. No, she said firmly. I had no idea about the financial fraud or the building safety issues. I knew he was married, though. She looked down. He told me you were separated. That you'd agreed to divorce, but were taking time to sort out the finances. I believed him because I wanted to. The familiar pain rose up, duller now but still present. The bracelet, I said. My grandmother's bracelet. Did you know it was hers? Chloe's face flushed. He said it was his mother's. That she wanted me to have it because she stopped. Embarrassment overtaking her, because I reminded him of her when she was young. God, it sounds so stupid now. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. Liam had played us both in different ways. Why did you come today? I asked again, more gently this time. Really? She met my eyes, her own shining with unshed tears. To apologize, I guess, and to tell you that what you did, exposing the fraud, making sure those buildings were fixed, that the people responsible faced consequences, it was the right thing. Even though it swept me up in the process, it was right. She hesitated, then added, and I wanted to see what kind of woman could survive what you went through and turn it into something like this. She lifted the book slightly. Art from ashes, I said with a small smile. It's a cliché, but sometimes clichés exist for a reason. Chloe nodded. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box, the same one Evan had given me on the pier that night. I turned it over to Nate as evidence, never expecting to see it again. I've been carrying it around for months, not sure what to do with it. It belongs to your family. It should go back to you. I stared at the box, memories flooding back. My grandmother slipping the bracelet onto my wrist on my wedding day, her arthritic finger struggling with the clasp, her whispered blessing. Slowly I picked up the box and opened it. The gold bracelet gleamed against the dark velvet exactly as I remembered it. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. Chloe nodded once more, then turned to go. At the door, she paused and looked back. "He doesn't know where you are now," she said. "In case you were worried." "I'm not hiding," I replied. "Not anymore." After she left, Julia came forward from where she'd been pretending to browse nearby shelves, clearly having overheard the entire exchange. "That was unexpected," she said, eyeing the velvet box in my hand. "Life usually is," I said, slipping the bracelet onto my wrist. It felt both strange and familiar, a piece of my past reconnecting with my present. Later that evening, as Julia and Nate drove back to Seattle, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine, watching stars appear over the water. The bracelet caught the light from the candle on my table, sending small golden reflections dancing across the weathered wood. My phone buzzed with a text, my editor, with news about the early sales figures for the book. They were better than expected. Much better. There was talk of a film option. I set the phone down and returned my gaze to the horizon. The setting sun had turned the sky into a canvas of deep purples and fiery oranges. In the distance, a ship moved slowly across the water, its lights just becoming visible in the gathering dusk. 3 years ago, I'd stood in my kitchen reading a text message that shattered my world. I'd thought it was the end of my story. Instead, it had been the beginning of a different one. I touched the bracelet on my wrist, feeling its familiar weight. My grandmother had worn it through 62 years of marriage, through wars and depressions, through the births of children and the deaths of friends, through all of life's betrayals and blessings. "I made it, Grandma," I whispered to the darkening sky. "Not the way I planned, but I made it." The tide was coming in, waves washing higher on the shore with each passing minute, erasing footprints, reshaping the landscape, bringing in new treasures with each surge. "Just like life," I raised my glass in a silent toast. To survival, to second chances, to stories that don't end where you expect them to, and to the woman I'd become in the aftermath of destruction. A woman who had lost everything and found herself in the process. A woman who had once planned the perfect revenge, but discovered something far more powerful along the way: the courage to begin again.